At some point, almost everyone experiences it. One day the messages slow down, replies get shorter, then nothing, no explanation, no closure, just silence. Ghosting isn't rare anymore. It has become a common ending to modern relationships, casual dating, long-term connections, even friendships. But what makes ghosting so powerful, so painful, and so confusing isn't just the disappearance itself. It's what happens inside the mind when silence replaces connection. To understand ghosting, we have to look at both sides, why people ghost and why being ghosted hurts so deeply. Because ghosting is not just a behavior, it's a psychological event. From the outside, ghosting looks simple. Someone stops replying, they vanish. But psychologically, the brain does not interpret silence as nothing. It interprets it as uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the most stressful states the human mind can experience. When someone suddenly disappears, the brain goes into threat detection mode. You replay conversations, you analyze your last message, you search for clues, you imagine scenarios. Not because you're weak, but because the mind is wired to seek patterns and explanations. Closure calms the nervous system. Ghosting denies closure. This is why ghosting often hurts more than rejection. Rejection gives certainty. Ghosting creates an open loop. One of the first psychological forces involved in ghosting is attachment theory. People with secure attachment styles tend to communicate discomfort directly. They may end a relationship, but they explain why. Ghosting feels unnecessary to them. People with avoidant attachment styles, however, are far more likely to ghost. Avoidants struggle with emotional confrontation. When intimacy creates pressure, distance feels safer than explanation. Disappearing becomes a form of self-regulation, not a strategy to hurt, but a strategy to escape discomfort. Anxious attachment styles, on the other hand, are the most affected by ghosting. Anxiously attached individuals rely heavily on relational reassurance. When that reassurance disappears suddenly, the emotional response is intense: panic, rumination, self-blame. This mismatch, avoidant ghosting an anxious partner, is one of the most common ghosting dynamics in relationships. But attachment style alone doesn't explain everything. Another major factor is emotional avoidance. Many people ghost not because they don't care, but because they care too much and don't know how to handle the emotional weight of ending something. Saying "I'm not interested anymore" feels cruel. Saying nothing feels easier. In this way, ghosting becomes a form of emotional outsourcing. The discomfort is transferred to the other person. The ghosted individual is left to process confusion, rejection, and loss alone, while the ghoster avoids immediate emotional strain. Short-term relief for one person, long-term emotional cost for the other. Technology has amplified this behavior. Dating apps and messaging platforms create an illusion of endless options. When people feel replaceable, empathy weakens. If someone disappears, the system silently encourages the idea that this is normal. But psychologically, humans are not built for disposable connections. Our brains evolved for social continuity. Even brief connections trigger bonding mechanisms: dopamine from anticipation, oxytocin from emotional intimacy, cortisol when connection is threatened. So when a connection ends without warning, the nervous system doesn't simply move on. It reacts as if something essential has been taken away without explanation. Another important psychological aspect of ghosting is power imbalance. Silence creates asymmetry. The person who disappears holds all the information. The person who is ghosted holds none. This imbalance can feel humiliating, destabilizing, and deeply personal. This is why ghosting often leads to obsessive thinking. The mind tries to regain control by finding meaning. What did I do wrong? Was it something I said? Did they meet someone else? These questions are attempts to restore psychological equilibrium. The painful truth is that in many cases, ghosting says far more about the ghoster than the ghosted. So why do people ghost instead of communicating honestly? One reason is conflict aversion. Many people were never taught how to end relationships respectfully. They fear emotional reactions, guilt, or being seen as the bad person. Ghosting allows them to avoid confrontation while maintaining a self-image of kindness. Ironically, this avoidance causes more harm than honesty ever would. Another reason is fear of accountability. Explaining your reasons means owning them. Disappearing removes responsibility. There is no conversation, no response, no follow-up. The relationship simply dissolves. For emotionally immature individuals, this feels safer. Ghosting is also influenced by social conditioning. In modern culture, speed and convenience are valued over depth. If something becomes uncomfortable, the instinct is to disengage rather than repair. This mindset carries into relationships. But emotional bonds don't disappear on command. When one person disengages abruptly, the other is left emotionally exposed. That exposure often leads to shame. Many ghosted individuals internalize the silence as a personal failure. In reality, ghosting is rarely caused by a single mistake. It's usually the result of emotional avoidance, misaligned attachment styles, or lack of communication skills. Let's talk about what ghosting does psychologically to the person who is ghosted. First, it disrupts self-concept. Humans form identity partly through relationships. When a connection ends without explanation, the brain struggles to update its internal model of reality. This can lead to self-doubt and lowered self-esteem. Second, ghosting activates rejection sensitivity. Even people who are normally confident may become hyper-aware of future interactions, fearing abandonment. This can affect future relationships, causing guardedness or emotional withdrawal. Third, ghosting can create rumination loops. Because there is no clear ending, the mind keeps returning to the unresolved situation. This prolongs emotional distress far beyond the actual length of the relationship. But ghosting doesn't always come from malice. Sometimes people ghost because they genuinely don't realize the impact of their silence. Especially in short-term or online interactions, they may underestimate the emotional bond that formed. However, intent does not erase impact. Silence communicates something, whether intended or not. It communicates disengagement, it communicates lack of consideration, and in many cases, it communicates emotional unavailability. So how can someone protect themselves psychologically from the effects of ghosting? The first step is reframing. Ghosting is not a measure of your worth. It is a measure of the other person's capacity for communication. Understanding this reduces self-blame. The second step is emotional boundary setting. When someone repeatedly avoids clarity, that behavior itself becomes information. The absence of communication is communication. Waiting indefinitely for answers that may never come keeps you emotionally stuck. The third step is learning to tolerate uncertainty without personalizing it. Not every unanswered message is a reflection of your value. Sometimes it's simply evidence of incompatibility. And what about those who ghost? If someone recognizes themselves in this behavior, the solution is not guilt, but growth. Learning to communicate discomfort is a skill. Ending connections respectfully requires emotional maturity, not cruelty. A simple message, honest, brief, and kind, can prevent weeks or months of psychological distress for another person. Ghosting may feel easier in the moment, but it erodes trust in the long run, both in others and in oneself. Ghosting has become normalized, but that doesn't make it healthy. At its core, ghosting reflects a struggle with emotional responsibility. Healthy relationships, even short-lived ones, require clarity. Clarity allows closure. Closure allows healing. Silence, when used to avoid discomfort, creates confusion instead. Understanding the psychology behind ghosting doesn't just explain behavior. It gives people the tools to respond differently. With awareness, individuals can choose communication over disappearance and self-respect over endless waiting. Because the most powerful response to ghosting is not chasing, not anger, and not self-blame. It is understanding followed by letting go.